Good morning, everyone. Yesterday we have seen module 1 where we have seen the Entra ID, core components Entra ID definition and what is driving Entra ID thing in Azure. Today we'll cover module 2 that will talk about the core concept and terminology we have in Entra ID, right? Whatever component we have that is listed within Entra ID then and that can be used to drive a business or drive a complete infrastructure in Entra ID. So let's get started. Um, we'll start with tenant that we have in Entra ID because everything in Entra ID starts from tenant. So the time we create a tenant in Entra ID, from where um, a domain or a tenant ID, a unique ID that will be given. So if I try to show you, this is the tenant that I've created with the name Vista T. Um, and this is the tenant ID that got created for that. This is global unique ID. This will be unique to me in entire Azure world. And this is a primary domain that this domain name I've given, but I don't have the external DNS. That's how it is picking the default DNS from Microsoft. And this is the license I purchased for Microsoft Entra ID P2 licenses that I've got. Um, so the time we create the tenant, we have got our domain name and we have got our directory created. So the main component that we have in tenant that's talk about start from here and then create use separate tenant for test dev versus production, all those things we can create. Maybe a multinational, we can give a use case that a multinational company might have separate tenants for different legal entities, right? Maybe in company we have multiple separate legal entities for one business unit, different business unit, or maybe a HR section, IT section, or all the sections are separate. Tenant can be created and it can be managed based on that. Next, we have directory. So both tenant and directory are interrelated. So let's say if in one subscription we have multiple tenants, right? Then if you want to switch from one tenant to different tenant, then we'll have to switch the directory. So switch one directory to different directory, and that will switch the tenant from there, right? And identity store. So basically, when we create a tenant, inside the tenant we can store user groups, devices, configurations. We can do all those things can be defined. So if you want to see the details of user groups for one tenant, then uh, we have to switch the directory. Definitely, if we have multiple tenants in one subscription, right? Next, we have subscription. In Azure, a subscription is the container for billing. So if we have one subscription and then maybe we might have multiple subscriptions as well. There's a concept to create parent child subscriptions. We say that spoke and hub, those kind of concept will be there. But in terms of subscription, um, we can create the subscription and based on that the billing management will be done. And definitely one subscription can be linked to multiple tenants, but it will be dedicated to only one tenant. That's how it works. And also subscription we can allocate at one tenant, and then we have multiple child tenant, then that will be taken from the parent subscription. So that's what is talk about the multiple Azure subscription for dev test prod environment, all under one Entra ID can be created, right? So in one Entra ID, we can have multiple subscription for different environments. Next, we have the users. Um, so user represent a person or a service account in Entra ID. So if you talk the cloud only, then you can create one user in Entra ID, and that user can log in with their, the email ID or the credential that will be given, that will be set at that point of time when we create that. And there might be synced from on-prem. So if we have multiple users at on-prem environment, and we sync that using Entra Connect, maybe now Entra sync, and then that will be available in AD. That will also represent as users. We also have guest external, the B2B collaboration or B2C. So those maybe some, as explained in the module one. Um, so if we have someone from external company and we want to invite them to work in a project, then we can invite them as a guest user and they can act and log into the entities, or maybe can gain the permission and they can do their project works, right? That's what it's mean, the guest access, and then that will also act as a user in Intra ID. Okay. Now next we have groups. So there are different types of groups we have in Intra ID: the security groups, Microsoft 365 groups, mail enabled security groups, dynamic groups. Um, all are groups that can be created. We can add the users into that, and based on their um, you know properties, we can assign the access to those users. They're part of that group. So mainly security group that control access things mostly. If talk about Microsoft 365 groups, then it controls more in 365 applications like Exchange, mailboxes, Planner, Teams, and all the 365 applications that we have. Mail enabled security groups that controls the maybe distribution list or maybe mail related permissions. A dynamic group, that is something it automatically allocate the users to these kind of groups, and they gain access to certain resources based on the definition for that group. So it will work in a way that for one user we have defined the some properties like user is part of this location, user manager is this one, this part of IT group or maybe part of HR group. So based on the property that we define for those users, they will be part of this group automatically. And once we remove those properties from the user, they will be removed from this group. So there are queries that we can create when we create the dynamic group, and they can be part of a group and they can be removed. That's how it works, right? Now, next we have service principal. So service principal basically one kind of identity that get created in Entra ID, and basically that refers one app registration. So if we take example of one of the application like Dropbox, if you're trying to integrate with Entra ID, then we'll have to create the app registrations for that particular Dropbox. We'll have to configure that at both the places, at application side, at Entra ID side. So in that situation, when we create the app registration for that Dropbox application, one service principal will be created for that, and that will help to create the integration and the login flow for those applications. We'll talk more in detail for these components once we go individual section for individual videos for those sections, and then it will be more clear on that. But for now, maybe you will have an overview idea on those topics. Next we have application registration. So these service principal and application registration both are kind of interrelated. So when we create the application registration, it automatically creates the service principal for that application, right? Uh, so if you take example of same application on Dropbox we have, so if we are trying to integrate that in Intra ID, then we'll have to create the enterprise application in Intra ID. I can just show quickly. Inside the enterprise applications, we can go new application, and then we can choose Dropbox here, like business. We can hit create, um, and then it will be created. Also, we can see the detailed steps what we have to follow to integrate that, right? So we'll create that. We'll do these lab activities when we talk individual sections, but for now you can see this overview of the thing that we have. um, so that's how we can create, and definitely when we create that, we'll have to give this app ID, redirect URL, API permission, all those things we'll have to define for a successful app registration creation. So this we see service principal, application station, enterprise application. Both are kind of interrelated. The only key differences are there. When we create the enterprise application, all this application station, service principal, those things will be created. But when we create the application station, right, at that point of time, enterprise application will be created, but still service principal will be created. So we can think a scenario that um, let's say we want to give access to Citrix component to create some VMs in Azure, right? Now there we can't give user ID password every time. At that point of time, we'll have to create the app registrations, and there we'll have to create the secrets, right? If you try to show the things here, um, app registrations, we can go, we can create a new registration here, can give some names like let's say Citrix and register. The time we hit create, it will create the service principal at the backend as well. But now we have got this app registration created. Now we can go to the certificate search. We can create a new secret here, giving some name, Citrix hosting connection, and we can set the expiry and all those things. But can hit and add, and now we have got the secret. Now we have got the the definitely, if we use the secret, we'll have to use the application ID that we have got from here, the client ID we say, and we'll have to use the directory ID, those things that will be defined in Citrix, and that's how they will hit to Azure, and then they will be able to create. Definitely, we'll have to add the permissions as well, API permissions, those things, so that this particular service principal is having permission to create the accounts, right? So both are interrelated. So enterprise application will come that is already predefined in Azure, and that thing we can just register and then use it. These are the examples for that. Now we have roles. So defined role in Entra ID, that is something we have multiple roles pre-created, built-in roles. We say they are global administrator, user administrator, license administrators. All those things are part of inbuilt roles. We can create the custom roles based on our requirements, and then they can gain certain level of access. Uh, and definitely for custom roles, we need P2 or P1 licenses from Microsoft. Role assignment is scoped in entire tenant or organizational unit. So when we define the role, it can be for entire tenant, it can be for a specific unit. We say organizational units is kind of administrative unit we have in Entra ID that can be created. And next we have the administrator unit. So that is something we can create one kind of administrative unit in Azure Entra ID, and certain level of role permissions. Those things we can define and push on those AUs, right? Now if we talk example of on-prem environment, we used to have the OU thing, right? In Entra ID, we have a AU. This is not the complete replacement for that organizational unit to administrative unit, but this kind of replacement we can use in the same concept. Uh, there are limitations here, but definitely we can use that. Next, we have devices. So devices we can register, we can join to Entra ID. Yeah, so it shows now multiple level of things we can do. The Azure AD registered, that will be one option. Azure AD joined, Entra ID joined will be there. Hybrid Azure AD joined will be there, so that will be part from maybe we are syncing something from on-prem, and one device is part of on-prem domain, and then parallel will be part of Entra ID, so that will be hybrid join. Those things of stuffs we can do. Also, it can be onboarded in tune, right? When we join that to the Entra ID domain. Next, we have the token and protocols. That is also one of the core component that we talk, the modern authentication that we have. So OAuth, Open Connect, they are modern secure authentication protocol that we have. Um, so Open Connect will be the front end, like any user comes in, they try to log in using modern authentication protocol Entra ID, then Open ID will be used there, and for authorization, OAuth token will be used. And this Open ID works in a JSON format. So any output or maybe anything we get out of it, that will be in JSON format, right? And maybe any authentication we want to proceed with OpenID using the client secret, client ID, tenant ID, then those things we'll have to define in JSON format. Where the SAML based authentication we see that works in XML format. So all those things we'll have to define in XML format, and then that's how the authentication can be carried out for certain level of application or maybe for users, right? Um, it talks about the best practices we have: implement role-based access control, use dynamic groups, reduce manual effort, review service principle regularly to avoid over permission apps, level and document all enterprise applications, require MFA for all privileged roles. That is the core component we should definitely follow to secure the environments. If you talk about the real world examples, here that employees sign into teams, and concept is used there, that users, groups, enterprise apps. So if you have one teams application, there should be one user ID, there should be one groups. They will define what kind of licenses was, what kind of permission that user will be having. Enterprise app, so definitely teams is one enterprise application, so they should be registered, they should be part of enterprise applications, so that they can log in, right? Contacted, invited for project, so they will be definitely guest users, and B2B, B2C invitation will be sent for those kind of users, and they can log in, they can carry out their tasks. Internal app with SSO, there are multiple internal apps, then we can put the app registration, service principal, enterprise apps for those internal applications, so that they can log in seamlessly with SSO. So one time they will put the credential when they will log into the laptop, and then rest, though that token will be carried out, and they can log into the different application that we have in the organization. Delegated IT admin for branch office, so for those kind of things we can create the administrative unit, scopes, roles, right? Bring your devices, those kind of thing we have, then they might be Azure AD, join, registered, conditional access policy that will be on top of that. And there are references from where I picked those resources. And every time when I put this documentation or anything that I present, they will be part of this Microsoft documentations. So every time, uh, you know, I go and research on those documentation, and that's how I try to add the details in the video. Okay. So for this session, I think that's it. Next day, we'll cover the tenant directories and licenses in detail. So I will create the directories, will create the licenses, will allocate the licenses to the users, or to the groups, and at the different levels, and we'll try to show how things works. So thank you and bye bye for now.